SEAL's dog found missing officer bound in storage. What happened next shocked the entire base. The air above Virginia Beach hung heavy with salt and silence. On base, the wind carried the faint tang of oil from the docks, mixing with the smell of sunburned asphalt and seaweed. Chief Petty Officer Ethan Ward drove through the back gate of Naval Support Activity Atlantic, his old Ford rumbling across the cracked pavement toward a row of steel storage units that shimmered under the afternoon heat. He had 3 weeks of leave, time meant for rest, but for men like him, rest was a foreign country. His world was built on readiness, not stillness. Beside him sat Ranger, a 7-year-old Belgian Malinois with the kind of calm that only comes from years of war. The dog's black muzzle and sable coat caught the light like wet bronze. His ears never stopped twitching. Even here, in the calm of American suburbia, his body hummed with alertness. Ethan pulled up in front of Unit 4A. The tires crackled over gravel. He cut the engine and exhaled slowly. For once there was no mission, no briefing, no target, just the mundane act of dropping off dive gear too heavy for his apartment closet. "Quick stop, buddy," he said, grabbing the key fob. Ranger hopped out first, paws silent on the hot ground, nose already working. Ethan unlocked the rolling door. It creaked up with a metallic groan, revealing a narrow cave of military leftovers, stacked cases, dive tanks, ropes, a weight bench. Dust shimmered in the shaft of light from the doorway. He stepped inside, grateful for the shade, and set down the duffel. It was quiet except for the steady thump of his own heartbeat. The base always felt quieter than it should, like the silence after a storm that never fully ended. Then Ranger froze. Ethan noticed it immediately. The way the dog's entire frame stiffened, the ears locked forward, nostrils flaring. He followed the gaze towards the left-hand wall, a thin corrugated divider that separated Unit 4A from 4B. "What is it?" Ethan asked. Ranger didn't answer, of course. He stepped forward one deliberate pace, his muscles taut, and let out a low rumble from deep in his chest, a sound Ethan hadn't heard since Kandahar, the kind of warning that preceded chaos. "Easy," Ethan said softly, crouching beside him. He pressed his palm against Ranger's neck, felt the pulse vibrating beneath the fur. The dog's breath quickened. His eyes never left the wall. Ethan straightened. Probably a rat. But his voice lacked conviction. The air changed. It was faint at first, a chemical sting that burned the back of his throat. Bleach, not the mild scent from a mop bucket, but a heavy raw concentration that clung to metal. Underneath it, a sour metallic trace. Blood. Ranger growled again, louder. Then he began to claw at the base of the wall, nails scraping against concrete in frantic rhythm. "Ranger, heel!" The command cut through the heat, but the dog ignored it. That was the moment Ethan knew something was wrong. A trained dog at Ranger's level never broke command unless the world demanded it. Ethan set down the duffel, his calm unraveling. He knelt beside the wall, pressed his ear to the metal. At first, nothing. Only the faint hum of a faraway generator. Then, between heartbeats, came a sound so small it almost vanished. A breath, a broken human breath. Ethan's eyes snapped open. The air in the narrow space thickened, heavy with adrenaline. "Hang on," he whispered to the wall. "I've got you." He sprinted to his truck, grabbed the emergency kit, and returned to the door of Unit 4B. The padlock gleamed gold in the sun, brand new, issued by base maintenance. He pulled a small leather pouch from the kit. Inside, the kind of lockpicks most men pretended not to own. "Watch," he told Ranger. The dog sat at the doorway, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the seam between the doors. Ethan's fingers worked fast, years of muscle memory guiding him. 2 pins, 3, 4. The lock clicked. He twisted the handle and lifted the corrugated door. The sound was deafening. Metal screamed against metal. A rush of cold air spilled out, unnatural against the August heat. It rolled over him, reeking of bleach and decay. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered, casting a yellow pulse over the scene. She was there. A woman, slumped in a steel chair, bolted to the floor, wrists bound behind her, head hanging low. Water dripped from her clothes onto the concrete, forming a thin, frozen puddle beneath her feet. Her uniform shirt was shredded, the navy insignia half torn away. "Jesus," Ethan whispered. Ranger darted forward, whining softly. He pressed his body against her legs, trying to share his warmth, licking her hand where the skin had turned bluish-white. Ethan checked her pulse, faint, thready. Her skin was ice-cold. He ripped open his trauma kit, wrapping her in a foil blanket, voice steady, though his hands shook. "You're gonna be all right, Lieutenant," he said, reading the tag still pinned to what remained of her shirt, Lieutenant Harper Mills, Naval Security. She stirred, barely. A sound, weak as wind through a vent. "Help me." Ethan looked up at the ceiling. No camera, no witnesses, just him, the dog, and the dying woman. He pressed his hand to his radio. "Base Command, this is Ward. Emergency medical at Storage Section C. I have a live casualty, female officer, severe hypothermia, possible torture. Request immediate medevac." No response. The static was dead. The radio lines were cut. Ranger growled again, turning toward the open door. The hairs on his back lifted, a silent alarm. Someone was outside. Ethan rose slowly, his mind snapping back into combat rhythm. He signaled the dog with 2 fingers. Silent watch. Ranger crept toward the light, his movements low, deliberate, eyes sharp as glass. A shadow passed across the concrete. Then, footsteps. Ethan's pulse spiked. Whoever had done this hadn't left the base. And now, they were coming back. He crouched beside the woman, voice low. "You hold on. You've got backup now." Outside, the footsteps stopped. Silence. Ranger turned his head toward the door, teeth bared, a single sound rumbling from his chest, the kind that once froze insurgents mid-step. And in that heat-soaked moment, Ethan Ward realized his leave was over. War had followed him home. The sound outside the unit stopped. The heat in the corridor thickened until it felt like the air itself was holding its breath. Ranger crouched, every muscle drawn tight, waiting for a signal that never came. Ethan's instincts, those sharp, animal reflexes forged in combat, kicked in before thought could catch up. "Stay," he whispered, though he already knew Ranger wouldn't. The Malinois gave a low growl, eyes locked on the door to Unit 4B. His claws scraped at the concrete, faster now, desperate. Then he broke command. With a sharp, guttural bark that echoed down the corridor, Ranger lunged toward the adjoining wall and began clawing at the base, chunks of concrete dust flying. "Ranger!" Ethan hissed, but even as he said it, he understood. The dog wasn't disobeying. He was warning. Adrenaline surged. Ethan grabbed his multi-tool, crossed the corridor in 3 strides, and studied the heavy brass padlock on 4B. Standard issue for base storage, cheap, mass-produced, easy to bypass. He slipped the tension wrench into place, twisted, felt the first pin give. He shouldn't have been this calm. Within seconds, the lock clicked open. He lifted the corrugated door halfway before the smell hit him again. Raw and chemical, like bleach poured over something that wouldn't stop bleeding. The interior was dim and wrong. Cold poured out, spilling across his boots, frosting the inside of the steel door. Ethan flicked on the small flashlight clipped to his vest. The beam caught movement. A figure, bound to a chair in the center of the unit. "Christ!" His voice was barely air. "Lieutenant Harper Mills." Her ID tag still hung from her half-torn uniform blouse. She was soaked, her hair plastered to her face, her skin the grey-white of hypothermia. Plastic ties cut into her wrists, and her ankles were secured to the chair's metal frame. Ranger moved first, a streak of motion through the narrow light. He pressed his body against her legs, whining softly, licking the exposed skin of her hand. His fur steamed in the cold air. Ethan dropped to one knee beside her, checked her pulse, faint, too faint, and looked at her face. Lips blue, eyes half open but empty. He reached for his trauma kit, unwrapped a foil blanket and covered her chest and arms. "Lieutenant Mills," he said, voice steady, like he was talking to a teammate on the radio. "You're safe now. Hang on." No response. Just the slow, shallow rhythm of a body fighting to stay alive. He peeled off his jacket, wrapped it around her shoulders, and began rubbing her arms to generate friction. Ranger whined, curling closer, his body heat seeping through the layers. Ethan pressed his radio again. "Base Command, this is Chief Ward. Emergency at Storage Section C, Unit 4B. I have a downed officer, unresponsive, signs of hypothermic shock. Request immediate medical extraction." Static answered him. No comms. He switched frequencies. Nothing. The radio lines hadn't just failed, they'd been cut. "Come on," he muttered. He reached for his phone. No signal. The concrete walls killed everything. Ranger barked once, sharply, looking toward the entrance. Ethan froze. Footsteps again, closer this time, more deliberate. He extinguished the flashlight. In the thin grey light filtering from outside, he could see a shadow sliding across the floor. Someone was checking the units. He reached into his bag, pulled out his sidearm, a compact SIG P320, unregistered to the base armory, and waited. The door rattled once, then nothing. Whoever it was moved on. Ethan exhaled, the tension in his shoulders refusing to leave. He turned back to the woman. "You're going to make it, Harper. I promise you that." He tore open an IV pack from his kit, inserted the line into her arm, and wrapped it tight. The cold had gone deep. Her body felt like marble. He needed to warm her core fast. "Ranger," he whispered. The dog looked up, eyes bright, understanding before command. "Warm." Ranger climbed carefully onto Harper's lap, pressing his chest against hers, head resting on her shoulder. His breathing was steady, deep, deliberate, the way he'd been trained to regulate heat during recovery ops. Ethan watched as her pulse flickered under his fingers, still weak, but there. Outside, sirens finally began to rise, faint at first, then swelling. He looked down at the dog. "Good boy," he whispered. By the time the medics arrived, Ranger refused to move. It took 2 men to coax him off her long enough to get a stretcher through the door. As they loaded Harper into the ambulance, her eyes opened for the briefest second. She looked right at Ranger and mouthed a single word that Ethan barely caught. "Why?" He had no answer. The next morning, the story spread through the base like wildfire. A SEAL and his combat dog had broken into a storage unit, defying regulation, and saved a missing naval officer thought dead for 2 days. Some called it heroic. Others whispered it was suspicious. Ethan ignored the noise. What haunted him wasn't the rescue. It was the smell of bleach, the deliberate cold, the severed power lines. Those weren't the signs of a kidnapping gone wrong. That was procedure. Someone had planned every inch of that room. That night, long after the medics left and the unit was sealed off with yellow tape, Ethan stood outside the gate, Ranger at his side. The sun was sinking behind the hangars, washing the base in bruised orange light. Ranger sat still, head tilted toward the row of storage units, eyes locked on 4B as if he could still hear something behind the metal. "You're not letting it go, huh?" Ethan said quietly. Ranger didn't blink. Neither did he. He knew what the dog was telling him without a sound being made. This wasn't over. The halls of the Norfolk Naval Medical Center smelled like antiseptic and quiet fear. Every step echoed off the polished floor, hollow and restrained, the way it did in places where soldiers came to remember what pain felt like. Ethan Ward stood in the waiting corridor outside intensive care, his uniform shirt still stained at the sleeves. They had taken Harper Mills straight into isolation. Hypothermia, nerve damage, signs of prolonged restraint. 2 doctors had whispered the same thing before she disappeared behind the glass doors. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Across the hallway, Ranger lay down on the tile, head between his paws, eyes fixed on the door of room 212. He hadn't moved since they wheeled her in. Orderlies gave the dog a wide berth. No one dared tell him to leave. The base commander himself had given permission. The dog stays. Ethan leaned against the wall, exhaustion pressing through his shoulders. The last 24 hours had blurred into a noise of flashing lights and paperwork. Yet amid it all, one truth gnawed at him. This was no random assault. This was surgical, controlled. A voice broke through the hum. "Chief Petty Officer Ward?" He turned. The woman approaching him wore a black suit and an expression carved from stone. Her badge gleamed under the fluorescent light. "Chief Investigator Dana Sloan, Internal Affairs," she said. "We need a word." Her tone wasn't a request. Ethan followed her into a debrief room down the hall. The door shut behind them with a sound that carried finality. Inside, it was just 2 metal chairs, 1 table, and a digital recorder blinking red. Sloan took the seat opposite him, flipping open a folder so thick it could have been pre-written. "You entered a restricted facility without authorization," she began. "Broke a federal lock, discharged personal firearm, and interfered with an active investigation. Care to explain why?" Ethan stared at her, disbelief hardening in his chest. "A naval officer was dying inside a storage unit, ma'am. I did what I had to do." She didn't look up. "Protocol exists for a reason. You don't get to play hero off the clock." "She'd be dead if I hadn't." Sloan raised an eyebrow, still reading. "That's not the point." Ethan leaned forward, voice low. "Then what is? Because I've been around long enough to know a cleanup when I see one. The locks, the cold storage, the bleach. Someone wanted her gone. Someone with clearance." That finally made her look at him. Her eyes were cool and sharp. "You're out of line, Chief." He met her stare. "No, I'm right on it." For a moment, the silence between them felt like a wire pulled too tight. Then Sloan closed the file and stood. "You're on temporary suspension pending review. Don't leave the city." She turned to the guard by the door. "Escort him off base property." Ethan said nothing. Words wouldn't help. The machine was already moving, and he was now a cog out of place. Outside, Ranger was still waiting, unmoving, his gaze fixed on the hospital door. Ethan knelt beside him, running his hand along the dog's back. The fur was warm, the heartbeat steady. "They don't want to find whoever did this," he murmured. "But we will." Ranger lifted his head, amber eyes catching the sterile light, and gave a single low bark as if agreeing. That night, in his apartment near the pier, Ethan poured coffee he didn't need and stared at the blank screen of his laptop. The room was bare except for Ranger's bed in the corner and the folded flag on the shelf. The glow from the base lights shimmered through the blinds, painting the walls in stripes of blue and gold. He opened a secure browser, typed a single encrypted code, and waited. After a few seconds, the screen flickered, and a familiar face appeared. A bearded man in a dim workshop surrounded by dismantled computers and old radio equipment. "Ward," the man said, grinning faintly. "If you're calling me, something's gone real bad." Ethan exhaled. "Hey, Wrench." "Marcus Wrench, Hale. former cyber intel operator, dishonorably discharged for hacking a Pentagon contractor. A genius, but one who never played well with authority. "I need a trace," Ethan said. "Storage Unit 4B, Naval Support Atlantic. Everything tied to it. Access logs, power records, security feeds. Someone wiped it clean." "On a military base?" Marcus whistled. "You're not making this easy." "Wouldn't ask if it was." A pause, then the sound of clacking keys. "Give me a few hours. Might cost you a favor later." "You already owe me 2. "Then make it 3. Call you when I've got something." The call ended, leaving only the hum of the fridge and Ranger's slow breathing. Ethan leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. The weight of the day pressed down, heavier than his gear ever had. Outside, the night was quiet except for the distant churn of the sea. Then Ranger's ears twitched. He rose from his spot, muscles tensed, head angled towards the window. "What is it?" Ethan whispered. The dog growled low. Ethan crossed the room, pulled the curtain aside just enough to look out. Across the street, a black sedan idled with its headlights off. 2 silhouettes sat inside, unmoving. The engine flared once before the car rolled away, melting into the dark. Ethan let the curtain fall. Ranger's growl faded, but his eyes stayed locked on the glass, every line of his body alert. Ethan whispered, more to himself than to the dog, "Guess we're not the only ones watching." In the hospital, 3 miles away, monitors in room 212 flickered. Harper Mills stirred in her bed, trapped between nightmare and waking. Her lips moved, forming a single, breathless word. "Pelican." The machine beside her beeped faster. In the empty corridor, Ranger lifted his head suddenly, as if he'd heard her across the city. Then he lay down again, eyes open, guarding the silence that now carried a secret no one else yet understood. The morning light over Norfolk came soft and grey, smothered by the haze rising from the bay. Ethan hadn't slept. He sat in his truck outside the hospital with a coffee gone cold in his hand, watching Ranger through the rearview mirror. The dog sat perfectly still in the back seat, head tilted, eyes fixed on the entrance as if waiting for a command that never came. Inside, Lieutenant Harper Mills was still fighting her way back from whatever darkness had swallowed her. Ethan's phone buzzed on the dash. The screen flashed a name. "Wrench," he answered. "Tell me you've got something." "You're not going to like it," Marcus said. His voice came through grainy, the faint hum of computers behind him. "I cracked into the logistics mainframe. Harper wasn't just a security officer. She was running a shadow investigation." Ethan straightened, tension building behind his ribs. "On what?" "Human trafficking," Marcus said. "Specifically, movement of personnel through military transport channels. She'd been tracking shipments marked as equipment returns, except half of those containers weren't equipment." Ethan's hand tightened on the steering wheel. "You're telling me they're using Navy convoys to move people?" "Looks like it. She was onto something called Project Pelican, coded routes, special clearance, and guess who signed the manifests?" "Who?" "Commander Briggs. Logistics head at your base." Ethan stared through the windshield, watching the wind scatter a line of seagulls across the parking lot. Briggs, his former commanding officer, the man who wrote his last commendation letter, the same man who had shaken his hand at the funeral of Ethan's teammate 2 years ago. Marcus continued. "Harper pulled access logs from his private drive. Someone noticed. 3 days later, she vanished." Ethan felt the pieces begin to click into place. The cold unit, the cut comms, the cleanup orders. Harper had gotten too close. He exhaled slowly. "Send me everything you've got." "Already did. But Ward, watch your 6. This thing's deeper than a bad apple. You start pulling, the whole orchard shakes." The call ended. Ethan glanced back at Ranger, who had his nose pressed against the window now, watching a medic walk past with a tray of supplies. Looks like we've got a new mission, buddy. Inside the ICU, the world was quiet except for the rhythmic beeping of Harper's heart monitor. The blinds were half closed, slicing the room into stripes of pale light. Her skin still looked fragile, like glass warmed too quickly. When Ethan entered, the nurse looked up. "You can't stay long," she said softly. "She's just starting to stabilize." He nodded and approached the bed. Ranger padded silently beside him. Harper's eyelids fluttered as they drew near. Her breathing hitched. The monitors jumped. For a second, Ethan thought she was seizing. Then he realized she was waking. He leaned close. "Lieutenant, you're safe. It's Ward. You're at Norfolk Medical." Her eyes opened, unfocused, darting from the ceiling to his face. Panic rose in her chest. Her pulse accelerated. "Hey," Ethan said gently. "Easy. You're all right." But she wasn't hearing him. Her lips moved around a sound that wasn't language yet, trapped somewhere between a scream and a whisper. Ranger moved closer, pressing his head against her arm. The sudden contact froze her. Her breathing slowed, eyes flicking down to the shape of the dog. He gave a soft whine, low and careful, as if reminding her of something familiar. She exhaled. Then, barely audible, came a single word. "Pelican." Ethan's blood ran cold. She tried to say more, but her throat caught. He held her hand steady until the tremors eased. "It's okay," he said quietly. "We'll find them." The nurse appeared again. "That's enough for now." Ethan nodded. "Come on, Ranger." But the dog didn't move. He stayed by her side, eyes locked on hers, as if refusing to break the connection. When Harper finally drifted back into sleep, Ranger laid his head on her arm one last time before following Ethan out. In the hallway, Ethan stopped near a vending machine and leaned against the wall. He could still hear the echo of that word. Pelican. He pulled up the encrypted files Marcus had sent. A map of transport routes appeared on the screen, lines converging on a single coastal facility labeled P-Point, a classified distribution center used for overseas supply runs. Ethan zoomed in. There, buried in the shipment logs, was Harper's name, listed as having cleared one of the last runs. The date matched the day before she disappeared. His phone vibrated again. A message from Marcus. "Briggs just filed a transfer request. He's leaving base in 48 hours. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not yet, he's not." He looked down at Ranger, who watched him with quiet intensity, tail still. The dog's eyes were steady, reflecting something Ethan didn't want to admit. He needed help. The next evening, Ethan snuck back into the base under the cover of night. Ranger moved silently beside him, tracking every sound, every shadow. They slipped through the supply yard and reached the fence surrounding the restricted hangars. Inside one of them, light burned behind frosted windows. They crouched low behind a cargo crate. Through the glass, Ethan saw Commander Briggs talking to two men in civilian clothes. He couldn't hear the words, but the gestures told. Enough, anger, money, fear. One of the men handed Briggs a small silver badge shaped like a pelican. Briggs pocketed it and nodded towards the hangar floor. Ethan followed his gaze. There, beneath the tarp, sat 3 transport containers, each stamped with a simple code: P-17, P-18, P-19. Ranger's ears flicked forward. He gave a low growl. "Yeah," Ethan whispered. "I see it too." Before they could move, a flashlight beam swept across the yard. A patrol. Ethan flattened against the crate, pressing a hand on Ranger's flank. The dog went perfectly still, breathing silent, trained instincts kicking in like a machine. The guard's light passed within inches of them before fading into the dark. Ethan waited a beat, then whispered, "Good boy." They slipped back out, unseen. By dawn, Ethan sat again by Harper's bedside, A small drive clutched in his hand, evidence. He didn't know how long she'd stay unconscious, but he spoke anyway. "I don't know what they did to you," he said softly, "but I'm not letting them bury it." Ranger lay at his feet, head resting against his boot. The room smelled faintly of saline and disinfectant. Outside, gulls cried over the bay, distant and mournful. As he sat there, Harper's hand twitched once beneath the blanket, brushing against Ranger's fur. For the first time since she'd been found, her heartbeat steadied. Ethan looked at the dog, who gazed back at him with something almost human in his eyes. Between the three of them, soldier, survivor, and the loyal soul who refused to leave, the unspoken bond was already forming. And somewhere beyond those hospital walls, the word pelican began to echo again, through encrypted lines and locked files, like the warning of a storm building beneath calm seas. The sun dipped below the hangars, washing the base in the red haze of evening. Ethan Ward stood outside the chain-link fence of Storage Section C, the same place where he'd found Harper. The area was now sealed with yellow tape and armed patrols. He scanned the perimeter, jaw tight, feeling the weight of the silence that hung over it. Beside him, Ranger sat alert, muscles coiled, nose twitching toward the faint metallic scent of oil and bleach that still lingered in the air. Marcus Wrench Hale crouched beside a power box, his laptop balanced on his knees. The glow of the screen illuminated his face, eyes darting as lines of code scrolled past. "They wiped everything," Marcus muttered. "Cameras, logs, entry records, all gone, like the unit never existed." Ethan glanced back toward the guards. "You can't erase the smell of fear," he said. Ranger gave a low growl, ears pricking toward the east fence line. Ethan followed his gaze and froze. A military SUV slowed near the gate before speeding off again. He couldn't see the driver, but he didn't need to. The vehicle carried an insignia he recognized. Briggs's department. Logistics Command. Marcus closed his laptop. "Whatever Harper found, they're burying it fast." Ethan nodded. "Then we dig faster." They slipped away before the next patrol passed. Later, they sat in Ethan's truck at an overlook just outside the base. The headlights were off, the bay stretching out below them, dark and endless. Marcus lit a cigarette, the glow cutting through the dark. "You know this could end bad," Marcus said. "You're poking holes in a wall built by men with stars on their shoulders." Ethan didn't look at him. "You ever think maybe someone should?" Marcus smirked. "You sound like Harper." "She almost died trying to tell the truth. I'm not letting that mean nothing." Marcus took a drag, then exhaled. "You still believe in saving people, huh? Thought war cured you of that." Ethan's gaze dropped to Ranger, who rested his chin on the console, eyes half-lidded but listening. "He didn't forget," Ethan said quietly. "Neither can I." They drove back to the base under cover of night, headlights off. Ranger stayed pressed against Ethan's leg, sensing the tension in his voice, the quickening of his heartbeat. When they reached the gate, a familiar figure stepped out of the shadows. "Cole," Ethan said, startled. Sergeant Ryan Cole stood in uniform, his expression caught somewhere between relief and regret. His right arm was stiff, a reminder of the shrapnel Ethan had pulled out of him years ago in Helmand. "Ward," Cole said, "you shouldn't be here." Ethan studied him. "Funny. That's exactly what people say right before something bad happens." Cole's eyes darted to the empty road. "Listen to me. I owe you my life, which is the only reason I'm saying this. You need to stop digging. You're not just poking the wrong bear. You're inside its den." Ethan stepped closer. "You're talking about Briggs." Cole hesitated. "I'm talking about command. All the way up." The words hung heavy in the air. Ranger growled softly, reading the tension. Ethan's jaw tightened. You're saying Harper was right. I'm saying, Cole whispered, if you keep going, you'll end up like her, or worse. Then he turned and walked back towards the barracks without another word. Ethan stood there for a long moment, watching the man disappear into the shadows. Ranger nudged his hand, breaking the trance. Yeah, Ethan murmured. I heard him. Doesn't mean he's wrong. That night, the sky pressed low over the city. Rain began to fall, fat drops that smeared across the windshield as Ethan drove towards his apartment. Ranger sat in the back, staring out the window, his reflection merging with the passing streetlights. Ethan's phone buzzed once on the dashboard, a text from an unknown number. Stop asking questions. He frowned. Subtle. He tossed the phone onto the seat, but before he could react, headlights exploded in his rear-view mirror. A black SUV swerved out from a side street and rammed into his truck with bone-jarring force. The steering wheel slammed into his chest. Ranger barked, snarling, bracing himself against the seat. Ethan fought to keep control, tires screaming as the truck skidded sideways across wet asphalt. Another hit. Harder. The impact threw him forward. Glass shattered. The world spun in a blur of rain and light. He heard Ranger's bark turn into a sharp yelp before the airbag punched his face and everything went white. When Ethan's vision cleared, the SUV was gone. His truck sat half in a ditch, steam hissing from the hood. His head throbbed. He reached for the passenger seat. Ranger? The silence that followed tore through him. Then, from the darkness, came a familiar sound, the scrape of claws on metal. Ranger climbed through the broken window, panting, blood streaking his fur but eyes fierce. He pressed his body against Ethan, whining low, licking the blood on his hand. Good boy, Ethan rasped. You saved us again. He pushed the door open and staggered out. The rain was falling harder now, washing the glass and gasoline off the road. He looked back at the skid marks, deep grooves leading straight into the ambush site. Whoever hit him had known his route, known when he'd leave the base. Ranger barked once, scanning the darkness, ears perked toward the tree line. Ethan followed his gaze. A faint reflection blinked between the trees, a scope glint, there for a heartbeat, then gone. Ethan raised his weapon, but the forest stayed silent. Whoever had been there was already gone. He turned back to the truck, breath steadying. It's someone inside, he said softly. They're watching us. Ranger growled, low and certain. Ethan looked at him. Yeah, we'll hit back, but not yet. He glanced at the distant glow of the naval base through the rain. Somewhere behind those guarded fences, men in uniform were hiding crimes under the name of service. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt the familiar pulse of war return. Not the kind fought overseas, but the kind that began when the truth was the only weapon left. Ranger stood beside him in the storm, head high, eyes sharp, the embodiment of loyalty and defiance. Ethan placed a hand on his neck. You and me, buddy. They started this. We finish it. Lightning split the sky above the bay, illuminating the base in the distance. In that brief flash of white, Ethan could see what lay ahead. Betrayal, danger, and the war he thought he'd already left behind. The storm outside Norfolk broke just before dawn, rain hammering against the windows of the small apartment, where Ethan and Marcus sat surrounded by open laptops and printed manifests. The air smelled of coffee, gun oil, and exhaustion. On the table lay a single object, an insignia pin shaped like a pelican. The metal glinted under the desk lamp. It was the same one Ethan had seen Briggs pocket during that meeting in the hangar. Marcus hunched over, the laptop, eyes burning from hours without sleep. You're not going to believe what's inside this thing, he said. He had pried the back open and wired it into a decryption module. The screen came alive with lines of code, then shifted to reveal files, dozens of them. "Talk to me," Ethan said. Marcus clicked through the folders. Shipment manifests, personnel rosters, GPS routes, encrypted payment trails. Jesus, it's all here. They weren't moving equipment. They were moving people. Captured civilians from overseas conflict zones, smuggled under humanitarian aid shipments. Ethan stared at the screen, his throat tight. And Command knew. Marcus nodded grimly. Briggs didn't just know, he ran it. Pelican wasn't a call sign, it was a transport network. Every run tied back to his logistics unit. These people weren't just covering for him, they were profiting off it. Ethan pressed a hand over his mouth. The realization hit with the force of a blow. Briggs, his mentor, the man who once told him loyalty was sacred, had turned it into a weapon. Marcus turned the screen toward him. "There's more. Look at this." On the monitor, a list of names appeared. Harper Mills, Ethan Ward, Marcus Hale, each marked with a red tag. Clearance termination. Pending. Ethan's pulse spiked. "They've put us on the kill list." Marcus leaned back, voice flat. "And they're not going to wait long." At that exact moment, a text flashed across Ethan's phone. "Unit compromised. They're coming." No sender, no timestamp, just those words. Ethan grabbed his jacket. "We need to get to Harper, now." They were out the door before the next lightning strike faded. Ranger bounded into the passenger seat, soaked within seconds, but alert, eyes fixed on Ethan's face. At the hospital, the security was thinner than it should have been. Too thin. Ethan felt it immediately. The emptiness of the halls, the way nurses avoided eye contact, the way silence had weight. They moved fast, Ranger leading. The dog's nose twitched, tail rigid. The elevator to the second floor opened with a chime that sounded too loud in the quiet building. When they reached Harper's room, Ethan stopped cold. A man in a hospital gown stood beside her bed, syringe in hand, the needle already pressed against the IV line. "Hey!" Ethan's voice cut through the air. The man turned, eyes flat and expressionless, military precision behind a civilian disguise. Before Ethan could draw, Ranger exploded into motion. The Malinois launched across the room like a bullet, knocking the syringe to the floor. It rolled under the bed as the man stumbled backward, arms flailing. Ranger clamped down on his wrist, teeth sinking deep. The fake orderly screamed. Ethan moved in, disarmed him in 2 strikes, and pinned him against the wall. The man's ID badge dangled loosely. It was fake, the barcode hand-drawn. Ethan pressed his forearm into the man's throat. "Who sent you?" The intruder gurgled, struggling to speak. "Orders from Logistics Command. Clean slate. No witnesses." Ranger growled, tightening his grip. The man froze. Ethan looked to Harper. She was awake now, eyes wide, terror flashing across her face. "Ethan, I've got you," he said. He zip-tied the attacker's wrists, called Marcus. "We've been hit. It's Briggs. He's cleaning house." Marcus's voice came through tense. "Then he's coming for me next. You get her safe. I'll move the files off-site." Ethan ended the call. The room smelled like adrenaline and antiseptic. Ranger's chest rose and fell rapidly, his coat streaked with the man's blood. Harper was trembling. Ethan knelt beside her. "It's over." She shook her head weakly. "No, you don't get it. Briggs isn't just covering up. He's shipping tonight. The last transport leaves at dawn." Ethan stared at her. "Where?" Her lips parted, barely moving. "Pier 17, Supply Route Delta." Ranger let out a sharp bark as if confirming the target. "Then that's where we go," Ethan said, standing. He looked back at the subdued man on the floor. "You tell Briggs I'm coming." They moved quickly through the corridor, keeping low. Ethan guided Harper into a wheelchair, covering her with a blanket to hide her face. Ranger stayed glued to her side, his body forming a wall between her and the world. Outside, the rain had slowed, leaving the streets slick with reflections. Ethan loaded Harper into the truck while Ranger jumped in the back seat, still watching the hospital doors. Harper's voice was hoarse. "You could walk away, Ethan. Pretend you never saw any of this." He looked at her through the rearview mirror. "That's not who I am." As they pulled into traffic, a convoy of unmarked vans passed them, heading toward the docks. Ethan recognized the logo stenciled faintly on the side panels. A pelican. Ranger stood up, paw on the window, low growl vibrating through his chest. Ethan pressed the gas. "We follow." Behind them, lights flashed in the hospital lot. Armed men in black tactical gear poured out of a van. Too late. The order had gone out, but the prey was already moving. Inside the truck, the air was charged with purpose. Harper clutched the flash drive Marcus had given them, her fingers shaking. "This file! It's enough to bury him!" "Then we make sure it sees daylight," Ethan said. Ranger settled between them, eyes sharp, the embodiment of loyalty and resolve. For the first time in days, Harper reached out, resting her hand on the dog's head. He didn't flinch. Instead, he pressed closer, a steady warmth against her trembling arm. Ethan glanced back at the pair, the woman he'd saved and the dog who'd saved them both. For the first time since this began, he allowed himself a small, grim smile. "Time to end this," he said. Outside, dawn began to break, a pale, uncertain light over the bay. In its reflection on the windshield, Ethan could see his own face, hardened by war and betrayal, staring back at him. And in Ranger's eyes, gleaming amber in the half-light, he saw something else entirely. Trust, the kind that never needed words. They drove towards the docks, the storm clouds pulling apart behind them, revealing the cold truth waiting ahead. Pier 17 loomed under the morning fog, cranes frozen like giants over the water. Ethan parked the truck 2 blocks away and watched the unmarked containers lined up on the dock. The air smelled of diesel and salt. Men in black fatigues moved briskly between the trucks, loading crates under the dull glow of floodlights. The Pelican logo was stamped on every one. Ranger's ears twitched. The dog crouched low, eyes fixed on the convoy. Ethan reached down, touched the collar. "Quiet, buddy, not yet." Harper sat in the passenger seat, pale but steady. Her hair was still damp from the hospital, her face marked by exhaustion. She held the flash drive like it was the last piece of her soul. "They're not moving cargo," she whispered. "Those containers have people inside?" Ethan's chest tightened. He'd seen evil before, in war zones, in the faces of men who'd stopped caring, but this was different. This was home. He took a deep breath. "We call it in." He dialed Marcus first. No answer. The call dropped after 1 ring. He tried again. Nothing. Then, through the static, a faint voice came. "Ward, they found me." The line went dead. Ethan closed his eyes, anger burning through the fatigue. They silenced him. Harper's hand gripped his sleeve. "Then we finish it for him." He nodded, started the truck, and drove straight towards the pier. They stopped at the gate. A guard stepped forward, hand raised. Before he could speak, Ranger jumped through the open window, growling so deep it vibrated through the steel frame. The guard froze, instinctively backing away. Ethan didn't slow. He slammed the truck into gear, crashed through the barrier, and rolled to a stop behind the nearest line of containers. Alarms blared instantly, red lights flashing across the loading bay. "Let's end this," Ethan said, pulling the sidearm from his belt. Ranger was already moving, weaving between crates, silent as smoke. Ethan followed, staying low. He spotted Briggs near the control office, barking orders to 2 contractors. The man looked older now, the weight of guilt showing on his face, though his voice still carried that same arrogant authority. "Load the last unit and seal it," Briggs shouted. Ethan stepped out from behind a forklift. That won't be necessary. Briggs turned, eyes narrowing. Ward, you taught me loyalty meant protecting your own. Ethan said. Guess that stopped applying when there was money involved. Briggs sneered. You don't understand how this works. I understand enough. Briggs nodded to one of the guards. The man raised his rifle, but before he could fire, Ranger charged from the shadows, hitting him full force. The gun went spinning into the dark. Ethan advanced. Another guard rushed him from the side. Ethan parried, elbow to the ribs, disarming him with a twist that sent the man crumpling. The fight was quick, brutal, and over before the alarm finished its second loop. Briggs stumbled back toward the control panel, pulling a small device from his pocket. You can't stop this. One signal and these trucks disappear. You'll never find them again. Ethan leveled his weapon. Try me. The sound of helicopter blades cut through the chaos. Everyone looked up as a dark aircraft descended through the fog, its searchlight sweeping across the dock. From the open side door, a voice blared through a megaphone. Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Commander Briggs, drop your weapon and step away from the console. Ethan blinked. He knew that voice. Special Agent Nadia Torres stepped off the helicopter as it landed, her tactical vest marked NCS. A line of armed agents followed her, spreading across the pier with precision. Ethan lowered his weapon slightly. Torres approached, wind whipping her dark hair across her face. Chief Ward, she said, you have something for me? Ethan handed over the flash drive. Everything, routes, payments, names, it's all in there. Torres looked down at it, then at Briggs. This is the end of the line, Commander. Briggs's face crumbled. You don't know what you're doing. You can't prove. Torres cut him off with a gesture. We already have. You'll spend the rest of your life explaining it to a judge. 2 agents cuffed him and led him away. As the noise settled, Harper stepped forward, leaning against a crate for balance. The morning light caught the bruises along her neck. She looked at Torres, then at Ethan. He saved my life. Both of them did. Torres gave a small nod. You're lucky they didn't listen to orders. Ethan glanced at Ranger, who stood a few feet away, fur matted with rain, tail still, watching everything with quiet authority. For a moment, even the agents gave him space. The dog wasn't just an animal, he was a soldier among them. Later that day, at the NCIS field office, the chaos had given way to silence. Paperwork and statements filled the hours. Ethan sat in a small conference room, waiting. His uniform jacket lay folded on the table. Ranger lay at his feet, head resting on Ethan's boot. The door opened. Harper entered, now in clean clothes, her skin still pale but her voice stronger. They're saying you broke protocol, she said. Ethan didn't look up. They're right. They're also saying you might lose your clearance. He nodded. Wouldn't be the first time someone got punished for doing the right thing. She walked closer, studying him for a long moment. Then she smiled. A real, tired human smile that cracked through the weight of everything. You and Ranger didn't just save me, she said softly. You saved what I believe in. Ranger lifted his head, tail thumping once against the floor, as if approving. Ethan met her eyes. Guess that makes us even. Outside, the sky over Norfolk was finally clear. The storm had passed, leaving the bay calm and wide. Torres entered the room briefly, holding a folder. Ward, you're free to go. Officially, this never happened. She placed the file on the table. Unofficially, thank you. Ethan stood, adjusting his jacket. You'll take care of her. Torres smiled faintly. I think she can take care of herself now. As Ethan walked out, Ranger padded beside him, steps perfectly in sync. The sun was breaking through the clouds, spilling gold across the tarmac. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something close to peace. Not because justice had been served, but because, for once, the right people had stood together long enough to make it matter. And beside him, Ranger, the dog who never quit, walked with the same steady rhythm, as if he too knew that the war was finally over. 1 month later, the headlines were still running. Commander Briggs sentenced to life without parole. The article showed his photo, uniform crisp, eyes hollow, a man who once lectured about integrity now shackled in disgrace. Ethan didn't bother reading the rest. He folded the paper, tossed it into the trash, and leaned back on the bench outside the rehabilitation center. The morning was cold, wrapped in a thin fog that hung low over Norfolk's harbor. The gulls called somewhere far off. Inside, he could hear the rhythmic sound of Harper's cane tapping against the polished floor. Ranger sat beside him, quiet as stone, watching the doors with the same steady patience that had seen him through gunfire, storms, and loss. His fur had grown rougher around the muzzle, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. When the doors opened, Harper stepped out, wearing the same determination she used to carry in her badge. Her steps were slow but steady now, every one a battle won. Ranger's ears perked up immediately. He rose, walked over, and pressed his head gently against her leg. She smiled faintly, running her hand along his back. "You never take a day off, do you?" Ethan stood, slipping his hands into his jacket pockets. "Neither of us does." Harper stopped a few feet from him, meeting his gaze. The lines around her eyes told stories he didn't need to ask about. "You didn't have to come today," she said softly. "I wanted to see how the world looks when it's not on fire," he said. That made her smile. Small, tired, but real. They walked together down the path that led towards the parking lot. Ranger kept a careful pace between them, as if guarding the silence itself. The scent of salt and pine drifted from the trees nearby. "So," Harper asked, "what will you do now that you're officially a free man again?" Ethan shrugged. "No more deployments, no more orders. I filed my resignation this morning." She looked at him, surprised. "You're leaving the service?" He nodded. "Yeah, I gave them the best years of my life. It's time to give something back to the part that's left." He glanced down at Ranger, who was sniffing a patch of grass near the walkway. "We've both earned a little peace." Harper's eyes softened. "Peace doesn't come easy, Ethan, especially for people like us." He chuckled quietly. "Maybe not, but I'm willing to try." They reached the fence at the edge of the base, the same gate where months ago everything had started. Now it was just another checkpoint, manned by a young corporal who barely looked old enough to shave. The corporal saluted Ethan as they passed. "Congratulations, Chief. They said your record's been cleared." Ethan returned the gesture. "Thank you. Take care of the ones after us." The kid nodded, not really understanding the weight of what he was saying. Beyond the gate, the road opened towards the harbor, where fog rolled across the water like smoke. Ethan paused, turning back for one last look at the sprawling base, rows of hangars, trucks, and barracks fading into the mist. Harper stopped beside him. "You sure you're ready to let it go?" Ethan smiled faintly. It already let go of me. For a moment, none of them spoke. Ranger sat between them, gazing out at the water, tail swaying slightly. Harper knelt and touched his head again. "You know," she said, "when I was in that hospital bed, I thought I'd never trust anyone again. Then I woke up to see him sitting there, guarding me. No words, no questions, just staying." Ethan looked down at the dog, his expression softening. He's always known when someone needs that. Ranger looked up at him, as if understanding every word. A car horn sounded in the distance. The world was moving again. Ethan exhaled, deep and steady, as though releasing everything he had carried since that night. The guilt, the noise, the orders that had turned men into shadows. He looked at Harper. "You ever think about starting over?" She raised an eyebrow. "Doing what?" "I don't know. Something real. Something that helps instead of hides." "I thought that's what you already did," she said gently. He laughed under his breath. "Maybe this time I'll do it without a uniform." She looked out toward the fog. "Maybe I'll help." The two of them stood there for a while, saying nothing more. The silence was easy this time, not heavy, like the ocean had finally stopped roaring inside their heads. Ranger gave a small bark, impatient. Ethan grinned. "You heard the man," he said. "Time to move." They walked through the open gate, the crunch of gravel underfoot. Ranger trotted slightly ahead, tail lifted, glancing back every few steps as if to make sure they were still following. Ethan looked at Harper, her cane tapping rhythmically beside her. "You think you'll ever go back to NCIS?" "Not yet," she said. "For now, I just want to remember what it's like to breathe without looking over my shoulder." "Fair enough." They reached the edge of the lot, where Ethan's truck waited. The same truck that had once been riddled with bullet holes now gleamed under a new coat of paint. He opened the door, and Ranger jumped inside with practiced ease, turning twice before settling in the passenger seat like it was always meant to be his. Harper hesitated before getting in. "You sure there's room for both of us?" Ethan smiled. "There always is." They drove out together, the fog swallowing the base behind them. The road wound along the coast, the horizon opening ahead in a pale strip of sunlight breaking through the mist. After a long silence, Harper spoke softly. "You ever think about how it could have ended differently?" Ethan kept his eyes on the road. "Every day. But if it had, maybe we wouldn't be here." Ranger shifted, resting his head between them on the console, eyes half closed. Harper reached over, stroking the back of his neck. "He's different," she said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "He's seen too much, like us." The truck rolled on through the haze, the base shrinking behind them until it was just a shadow among others. Ethan turned to look out at the sea. "No more orders, buddy," he said softly. "Just peace." Ranger lifted his head, gave a quiet huff, and then rested it back down, content. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan believed it. Peace wasn't somewhere far away or locked behind command gates. It was right here, in the small silence between heartbeats, in the weight of trust beside him, and in the quiet road stretching endlessly forward. 6 months later, the sound of wind chimes mingled with the distant barking of dogs. On the outskirts of Annapolis, where the Chesapeake air smelled faintly of salt and pine, a wooden sign stood at the entrance of a small ranch. Ranger's Haven, training and therapy for veterans and canines. Ethan leaned against the fence, sleeves rolled up, watching a group of veterans guide their dogs through a simple obstacle course. Some of the men moved stiffly, others kept their distance, their eyes shadowed by old wars that never really ended. But every now and then, one of them smiled, awkwardly, hesitantly, when a paw touched their knee, or a tail wagged at the sound of their voice. "Not bad for week 3, Harper said behind him. She was wearing jeans and a Ranger's Haven t-shirt, her gait steadier now, though her cane still clicked softly against the wooden boards. Ethan turned to look at her, a small smile forming. "Better than I expected. Most of them didn't want to touch a dog when they first got here." "That's because they see too much of themselves in them," Harper said quietly. "Wounded, trained to obey, unsure what to do with peace." Ranger, older now but still commanding, trotted toward them from the far end of the field. A German shepherd named Delta followed at his heel, copying every move like a shadow. Ranger stopped in front of Ethan, sat and looked up, waiting for approval. Ethan crouched down, scratching behind the dog's ear. "Good work, buddy. Teaching faster than I ever could." Harper smiled. "He's better at this than either of us." They both turned as a familiar figure approached from the driveway, Marcus Hale, holding a stack of folders and his ever-present tablet. His limp was more pronounced now, a souvenir from a past deployment, but his grin was the same. "Server's live," Marcus announced. "We've got the website up, donation link running, and a dozen vets signed up for the next program. Oh, and one message from the Department of Defense. Apparently somebody up top wants to use your story for a recruitment campaign." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Recruitment?" "Yeah, they called it a symbol of courage and recovery." Harper laughed softly. "That's ironic. They tried to bury us once." "Guess ghosts make better headlines than heroes," Marcus said with a shrug. Ethan didn't answer. His eyes were on the field again, where one of the veterans, a man named Tom, who had lost his leg in Kandahar, was trying to coax a timid Labrador to climb over a low hurdle. The dog hesitated, trembling, until Ranger padded over and gently nudged its side. Slowly the Labrador climbed up, then jumped down on the other side. Tom dropped to one knee, wrapping his arms around the dog. For the first time since he'd arrived, he laughed. Short, hoarse, but real. Harper's gaze softened. "That right there. That's why this place matters." Ethan nodded, the tightness in his chest loosening. "Yeah, that's the sound of someone remembering what hope feels like." A car pulled up near the main house. Agent Nadia Torres stepped out, wearing civilian clothes, but with the same sharp confidence she had in the field. She carried a clipboard and a coffee in the other hand. "Place looks good," she said, surveying the grounds. "Even smells like freedom, wet dogs and determination." Ethan grinned. Didn't know NCIS made house calls. "Not anymore," she replied. "I took a leave. Figured I'd help you navigate the legal stuff. Non-profit paperwork, liability insurance, that kind of fun." "Appreciate it," Ethan said. "Never been great with red tape." "Yeah," she said, smirking. "You were more of a kick-down-the-door type." Marcus snorted. "Still is." As they talked, a small group of visitors arrived, local reporters, some military families, and a few officers from the nearby base. They wanted to see the place everyone had been whispering about, the veteran and his dog who exposed a trafficking ring and built a sanctuary instead of running from it. Ethan wasn't comfortable with the attention, but Harper insisted. "If our story helps one person find their way back, it's worth it." They gathered near the training field where Ranger sat proudly beside the American flag that flapped lazily in the breeze. Ethan stepped up to the small podium Marcus had rigged from scrap wood. He wasn't a speaker. Words had never come easy for him. But when he looked at Harper, at Marcus, at Ranger sitting tall beside him, something in his chest settled. "This place isn't about me," he began, voice steady but low. "It's about second chances, about remembering that no matter what we've seen, what we've done, or what we've lost, there's still something left worth protecting." He looked down at Ranger, who met his gaze with quiet loyalty. "Every dog here, every vet, you're all fighting a different kind of war now, one that doesn't use bullets, one that just asks you to stay." The audience was silent, the kind of silence that holds respect instead of emptiness. Afterward, as people drifted away, Harper came to stand beside him. "You did good. I just said what needed to be said. Sometimes that's what makes it good," she replied. Behind them, Ranger barked once, sharp, confident, as if to punctuate her words. Delta barked right after, mimicking him. Harper laughed softly. "Looks like you've started a legacy, old boy." Ethan crouched, resting a hand on Ranger's shoulder. He's not just teaching dogs, he said quietly. He's teaching us how to live again. The sun dipped lower, painting the field in amber light. Veterans laughed. Dogs ran free. For the first time in years, Ethan didn't hear the echo of war in the back of his mind, only the steady rhythm of paws against grass and the soft wind carrying the scent of home. By evening, the field was empty except for Ranger, who stood watching the horizon, tail still, posture proud. Ethan joined him, hands in his pockets. "You did good, partner," he said. "Guess we finally built something that lasts." Ranger didn't move, but his ears flicked back at the sound of Ethan's voice. And in that stillness, between the shadows of the past and the promise of tomorrow, Ranger's Haven wasn't just a name anymore. It was a legacy born of pain, courage, and the simple, unspoken truth that healing always begins with trust. A soft morning mist drifted over the rolling fields of Ranger's Haven, the dew glinting like scattered glass beneath the first light of dawn. The air carried that clean, quiet stillness that only comes before the day wakes, the kind of peace you earn, not stumble into. Harper stood on the porch of the main cabin, steaming mug in hand. She breathed in the scent of coffee and wet earth, her body still marked by faint scars, but stronger than it had been in years. Out in the yard, Ranger lay beside the wooden gate, head up, ears alert, his eyes scanning the open horizon as though guarding something only he could see. She smiled. "You never rest, do you?" she murmured. Ethan's voice came from behind her. He doesn't know how. He stepped out onto the porch, his flannel shirt half-buttoned, boots damp from the morning grass. He looked older now, not weaker, just steadier, as if the storms had finally passed and left something solid behind. He handed her a second mug. "They're setting up for the new arrivals," he said. "Couple of guys from Fort Bragg. One of them lost his K9 partner last year." Harper nodded slowly. "Then this is exactly where he needs to be." They stood in silence for a while, watching as a group of veterans led their dogs around the training course. Laughter echoed faintly across the yard. The kind of laughter that didn't sound forced anymore. Ranger's tail thumped once against the dirt, but he didn't look away from the gate. Ethan followed his gaze. "You think he's waiting for something?" Harper shook her head gently. "No, he's making sure nothing's left behind." A pickup truck rattled up the driveway, tires crunching over gravel. The door opened, and a small group of school kids stepped out, part of a field trip to learn about therapy dogs and veterans' recovery. Their teacher waved at Harper. "Morning. Hope it's okay if the kids watch for a few minutes?" "Of course," Harper said warmly. "Just stay clear of the working dogs." One of the boys, maybe 10 years old, pointed toward Ranger. "Mom, what about that one? He looks old." Ethan crouched down beside him. "Old, yeah, but not retired." The boy tilted his head. "Does he ever stop watching?" Ethan's lips curved into a quiet smile. "Only when the truth is safe." The boy frowned as if thinking that over, then nodded solemnly, the kind of nod only kids give when something lands deeper than they can explain. He turned to his friends. "He's like a superhero dog." Ranger finally stood, stretched his legs, and trotted toward them. The kids stepped back instinctively, but Ethan motioned them closer. "Go on, he won't hurt you." Ranger sniffed the air, then lowered his head so the smallest girl could touch his fur. She giggled, fingers brushing the coarse tan and black coat. "See?" Harper said softly from the porch. "Still teaching." Ethan glanced at her. He always will. The rest of the morning passed in easy rhythm, the sounds of dogs barking, boots scuffing on dirt, laughter breaking through memory. Harper led the kids inside for a short tour, while Ethan stayed outside, fixing a loose board on the fence. Ranger settled beside him, watching every nail driven, every motion measured. "Hey, partner," Ethan said quietly, not looking up. "You remember when this place was just a broken-down barn and a bad idea?" Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching, eyes steady on him. "Yeah," Ethan said. "You saw it first, didn't you? Saw what it could be." The wind rustled the trees nearby. Somewhere behind them, a whistle blew, Marcus calling the morning drills. Ethan smiled faintly. By afternoon, the sky had turned that soft Virginia blue, dotted with clouds drifting like smoke. Harper came back outside, her hair loose around her shoulders, and sat next to Ethan on the steps. "You ever think about the old days?" she asked. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Then I look around and realize the best part of them followed me home." She turned her gaze toward Ranger, who now sat at the far end of the yard, guarding the entrance like a sentinel carved from memory. "He's getting slower," she said. "So am I," Ethan replied, "but he still gets up before I do." She laughed, low and genuine. "That's because he's afraid you'll start working without him." The sun dipped lower, setting everything aglow. A group of veterans gathered by the fence, watching Ranger as he made his slow patrol along the perimeter. He stopped once, nose to the wind, before lying down again at his post. Harper rested her chin on her hand. "Do you think he knows it's over?" Ethan shook his head. "For him, it's never over. He's a guardian. Doesn't matter if it's a base, a mission, or a home, he keeps watch. It's who he is." As the light softened, the kids and veterans drifted inside. The yard emptied. Ethan walked toward the gate one last time before sunset. Ranger was there, lying with his paws crossed, head up, eyes fixed on the horizon where the road disappeared into gold. Ethan crouched beside him. "You've earned your rest, buddy." Ranger blinked slowly, then looked out again, as if saying that rest could wait. Harper joined them, slipping her arm through Ethan's. Together they watched the last light fade from the fields. The sign above the gate caught a final flash of sunlight. Ranger's Haven, where trust begins again. In that golden silence, you could almost believe the world was safe. And then, faintly, a child's voice echoed from somewhere near the cabin, repeating the question that had lingered in every heart that ever met the dog. "Does he ever stop watching?" Ethan smiled, eyes never leaving the horizon. "Only when the truth is safe." The screen fades to black. Words appear, simple and quiet. He didn't bark for food. He barked for the truth. What's your story with a loyal pet? And as the final shot lingers, a silhouette of Ranger at the gate under the rising sun, the faint sound of his breathing carries through the wind. A legacy not of battle, but of vigilance. A promise that some guardians never stop keeping. Subscribe to the German Shepherd channel, where every story honors loyalty, courage, and the bond that never breaks.